Gladden's brigade is over on the other flank with Chalmers and Withers division, where it's supposed to be. But 2 regiments do wind up over here, the 22nd Alabama and the 1st Louisiana, along with Zach Dees, the brigade commander. So this is kind of the contingent here. So there is some mixing and matching of units. Obviously, it's not that the whole army is perfectly coordinated. I argue that it's a little more coordinated than it was even the first day, but it's not perfectly coordinated. I meant to mention earlier, Polk's corps is probably the most mixed up and fractured. Even then, we saw Russell's brigade is pretty much intact, and that's Clark's division. The other division there, Cheatham, we see some of his folks here, and then most of his folks are fighting together. That's Bushrod Johnson's brigade, and who's the other one? I forget who the other one is off the top of my head, but they're mostly over on the other side. The least together brigade probably is the other brigade of Clark's division. That's A.P. Stewart's brigade. 4 regiments, and each of those, this is on a brigade that it happens, each of those 4 brigades, and we just saw the 33rd Tennessee, that's one of those regiments, they will fight in 4 different spots on the 2nd day. So that brigade is completely fractured, and Stewart himself will be with the 13th Arkansas back at Daniel Davis Wheatfield. He'll be involved in the attack and counterattack and so on. But that brigade is completely fractured, but it doesn't happen on the 2nd day. That brigade is pretty much fractured on the 1st day. A lot of it is, of course, Clark's division is probably the worst off because Clark is wounded early on the 1st day. So that breaks down any of that cohesion. Stewart's brigade, in this 11 o'clock attack against the crossroads and all that, that brigade is split up. The 4th Tennessee goes against McAllister's battery at Review Field, and the rest of it goes over Russell's people actually toward Wraith's brigade. So that happened on the 1st day. So it's not like that is inherent to the 2nd day. Now, getting back to this is Gladden's brigade. This is the end of the Confederate line. There are no more Confederate tablets out there, and you can tell what they're doing. It kind of angles up here just a little bit, and you can look in maps and so on. The idea is to go all the way to Owl Creek, and if you've been out to the picnic area, you know that you're right at Owl Creek out there. But you see only 300 men. These don't quite reach to Owl Creek. So the next best thing is to reach to what and anchor your flank on what? A little rivulet of Owl Creek, of something that flows into Owl Creek. So you see this little bottom here. That's what they're trying to rest their flank on to give it some type of protection, because you don't want your flank just out in the middle of nowhere. So this little feeder branch of Owl Creek here is the best they can do. This is as far as they can reach. They're getting out of men, basically out of numbers, so that they just got to make do here. Unfortunately, it's not quite good enough. Now they can hold obviously against frontal assaults. They've been doing that from here all the way back to the Peach Orchard, right? Hold against frontal assaults. I told you something was coming. This leverage was coming from an unexpected source. What is it and where is it? Lew Wallace. And look around. What do you see? If you're Zach Dees here facing that direction, do you see anything here that would cause you discomfiture? Look in your rear over here. Do you see that Union tablet facing this direction? And on down, this is Thayer, this is Whittlesey. Whittlesey is actually a little bit farther back, I believe. I get them mixed up. Thayer and Smith. Basically what has happened, Lew Wallace, once he crosses into Jones Field, he realizes this Confederate flank does not reach all the way to Owl Creek, and there is an opportunity here, so he will flank. He'll move around, and basically you look at the alignment of what Lew Wallace's division is doing right here. This is his alignment, and it is directly flanking this Confederate line here because it doesn't reach all the way to Owl Creek. And what does Dees and Russell and Cheatham and everybody else do? We got a hightail out here. They hold all day to frontal assault, but when they get flanked, they absolutely lose it, and they start falling back. So that's the leverage that has caused all of a sudden now about 12 o'clock or so. He says, well, until about 10 a.m. I think it's probably a little bit later than that. But this is the leverage that will cause this entire Confederate line from Hardee's position over here, as it bends around just like this to Jones Field, kind of this concave look here. It will cause this entire Confederate left flank to fall back to a new line along the Hamburg-Purdy line road, a little bit straighter. It'll be kind of out into Crescent Field where we're going to go next. We're heading back to the church. Hardee doesn't move. on the right. He doesn't have to move because the force comes on the left. So this flank falls back and they go into line, and the same exact thing starts happening. The Federals start pushing forward, attacking. We'll see heavy fighting at the crossroads out here. They're never able to drive the Confederates back, but there'll be another leverage point because the Confederate line doesn't reach to Owl Creek again, and that's going to be who? Lew Wallace does the exact same thing. He turns around that flank again. So he achieves by maneuver what everybody else hadn't achieved by frontal assaults, and he's able to do it with a lot less casualties. Now, Lew Wallace is kind of the red-headed stepchild of Shiloh, and he gets all the blame for everything. He was lost on the first day. Makes me want to gag, you know. He was not lost on the first day. He knew where he was going. Miscommunication, all that played a role into it. A lot of people get on Lew Wallace on the second day. Well, he didn't lose many casualties. In fact, Hazen's brigade out at Daniel Davis Wheatfield will lose more casualties than Lew Wallace's whole division loses at Shiloh. But a couple of things kind of mitigate this a little bit. Lew Wallace will keep his men prone. He'll keep them on the ground until they are actually needed to move, and that saves a lot of lives. But also, instead of just running them up against frontal assaults, he will actually maneuver and get around the flank. So Lew Wallace is kind of, to me, I know a lot of people aren't going to like this, but to me, even though he loses, you know, fewer troops and all that, he is the force that actually causes this initial Confederate line that's held now from 9 or so in the morning till about noon to fall back. Nobody else has been able to done it, but Lew Wallace's pressure on that flank forces the Confederate line to fall back. That's my take on it anyway, and you can see it vividly out here with the positioning of the tablets and so on, and you see the same time periods and so on each of those. So next time you're here, go out to the picnic area. It's not just a picnic area. This is South Field. It's very important in terms of the second day fighting.
Well, Tim?
Yes, sir.
On some videos and maps, you'll see the big arrow as they come around this side, and the name they put on it is Sherman.
Yeah. Well, Sherman is still back a little bit, and he, in fact, Lew Wallace waits till Sherman comes up about 10 o'clock or so, and Sherman is involved in this movement forward. Really, it's more McClernand farther to the left in this kind of no man's land, but Sherman is still back there. In fact, Wallace has to bring a portion of his troops that are kind of funneled out of position as they move. There's not a lot of room out here to Owl Creek, so he has to bring some of those troops back over here. He actually says this helps me kind of secure my flank and Sherman's flank, which Sherman's not quite as far up yet. He kind of gives it to Sherman just a little bit. But again, what Sherman had been through the day before, you know, I'm not sure I would have been in too good a shape either. But definitely it's not Sherman, it's Lew Wallace on his own accord, moving around and outflanking the Confederate line here. Don't believe every map you see.
Well, I didn't believe it. I was just commenting.
All right, now we got some choices. We're going basically to Crescent Field, where we'll see the second version of this, kind of version 2.0. We can just kind of walk down the side of the road, or we can go through the woods. I think the road would be easier, but whichever y'all want to do. Not far out there. Go down the side of the road.
That's the line right there.
I think there's plenty of room on each side.
Okay. To the west there, the Valley of Owl Creek, how close we are. That house, in fact, is just right smack on the lip there. And you can see how it goes down, and then that's the high ground on the other side of the creek there. So that's how close we're talking about keeping the flanks on Owl Creek and the high ground on Owl Creek. You don't have to go all the way to the creek in the bottom land, as we learned earlier today. You know, a lot of that's soggy. You can't get through that anyway. So you just need to anchor yourself to the high ground bordering that creek so that nobody can go around. The other thing to see is Lew Wallace's position here. You can see, not counting the square tablet here, that's McDowell's position earlier on the first day. But you can see the 24th Indiana, some of these regiments here, 11th Indiana, and then some of the Missouri regiments and Thurber's battery, so on into the woods. Which way is this line of battle facing? Facing more that direction than it is anything. Seriously, anybody got a compass? You got a compass on that thing?
Yeah, I do. Hold on a second, I'll give it. Pull it up.
You have to be careful out in here. Oh, you got a compass?
Yeah, and this thing it says that's north, south.
South is that direction?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Is that what you get? Yeah, south is that direction. So which way is this line facing?
Yeah.
South.
Looking at the Indiana Monument south.
East. Yeah. You have to be careful. If you look on the map, you can tell Highway 22, we're right here. Highway 22 obviously wasn't here at the time. There was an old road kind of farther to the south. But it makes a big curve just right up at the past those woods there. So you kind of have to be careful. The roads, you know, when they curve, they'll fool you and you get mixed up and so on. But it's obvious what's going on here with Lew Wallace's position basically facing southeast. In the Confederate line, where did we say the Confederate line? This reconstituted Confederate line is along the Hamburg-Purdy Road and kind of out into Crescent Field. Is facing northeast. So if Wallace is facing southeast here, what has he done again? He has crossed the T again and maneuvered around here and gotten on the flank. So this is the second position, and we won't go into large detail about all the fighting on this Hamburg-Purdy line here. We will talk a little bit about the crossroads as we're heading back to the church. But it is really the movement that cracks this second position as well, the second Confederate line as well, and Lew Wallace is part of that. And if you read Lew Wallace's report and later his memoirs, which both of them may be fiction, he writes fiction, not totally fiction, but his memoirs more than his report. But only Lew Wallace could talk about moving through Crescent Field. He doesn't name the field, of course, that comes later, but he talks about the hillocks that his Union lines cross and one hillock to the other and all that, and only a novelist could talk about hillocks on a battlefield. But you can tell exactly what he's talking about here, you know. Kind of interesting. So let's just move through the woods. We'll move across and somehow meet the tour road over there and head back toward the crossroads. Is that what you get south of you? You have a fancy. On this position, of course, this is the Hamburg-Purdy Road. The Confederate line would fall back into this second position. Of course, Hardee's going to stay the same. I've showed y'all on the map. Hardee will stay the same. The Confederates will fall back on this flank to Review Field, which is right down the road there. We all know where Review Field is. And then up toward the crossroads. From here, it'll kind of curve a little bit up toward Crescent Field. And that'll be where Lew Wallace, of course, will a second time flank the line and force it to fall back. Heavy fighting in this area. We'll just talk just a little bit about the most vicious parts of it. When the Federal Army of the Ohio moves forward, Rousseau of McCook's division will continue to move forward north of the Corinth Road. Unfortunately for him, Crittenden's division will move southward along the Eastern Corinth Road. So they're kind of, if this is Eastern Corinth Road and you're going that way, Crittenden is, McCook's going that way, it's opening up a gap between the two. By this time, Crittenden has Boyle and Smith both oriented the same direction, and they're moving forward against Harper's Battery and some of the others in this area. With McCook going straight, basically westward until he gets here and starts southward, he is obviously going to move in front of the Army of the Tennessee position, Sherman and Grant and McClernand and all those. And that happens right out here. Basically, they get shunted to the side. And I don't know how many times I've read that, regimental commanders said we were moving forward, but General Buell came along and said for us to stop and give his troops precedence, and so Buell is actively trying to take the lead here. So as we move into this area, Rousseau will actually take the lead and move out into Wolf Field here, but they very quickly find that they're out of ammunition, so he will replace them with the next brigade behind Kirk's brigade, Edward Kirk, who will move out into Wolf Field. And the second most heavy casualties that the Army of the Ohio sustains on that day, I believe, is Kirk's brigade in this fighting along this position right here in Wolf Field. They will make an attack and be driven back. And in fact, to help fill this gap, McCook will bring up his 3rd Brigade that just arrived, Gibson's brigade, William Gibson, I believe. You see some of their monuments, not McClernand's folks in a line that direction, but you see the one, the 15th Ohio with a drum on top, and then that Indiana marker right above the car, and then on down the monument, on down the road there, 49th Ohio. That's Gibson's brigade. They make an attack, but the Confederates have a solid line here, of course, before Lew Wallace outflanks it. The heaviest fighting is in Wolf Field, where we have the 34th Illinois, and you can see that monument right behind the Tennessee monument where the Boy Scouts are. That's 34th Ohio. Kirk is colonel of the 34th Ohio, and so the lieutenant colonel, what's his name, Shumway, I believe, is killed on the spot, and so the regimental commander, the lieutenant commander is down. Colonel Sion Bass of the Indiana Regiment, I believe it's the 29th or 30th, I can't remember which one, is also killed. So you got some pretty heavy casualties here. Brigade Commander Kirk himself is wounded as well. He takes, I believe, a cannonball in the shoulder, so he's down. So there are some pretty massive casualties occurring right here. So that shows you the Confederates were still putting up some pretty harsh resistance, even this late in the day, even having been driven back. So the whole thing happens again. This is before Lew Wallace outflanks it. The Confederates aren't able to counterattack and drive the Federals away, but the Federals sure aren't able to, by frontal assault, drive the Confederates away. And the factor that shifts all this is Lew Wallace and his outflanking of this line. Same old people, Russell and Cheatham and so on, out toward Crescent Field. So the whole line has to fall back once more. Everybody goes back to a new line, which we'll see as we walk toward Shiloh Church. Trey Booth's brigade will be there, Bankhead's battery, and some of the others. It'll be continued over into Prentice's camps. By this time, once this line falls, Hardy over on the extreme right figures out, okay, we do have to fall back. We held the first time, we didn't have to move, but this time we do have to move, because basically the only way out of here is which way? Same way we came in out the Corinth Road. Maybe the Eastern Corinth Road, some they will use that, but we don't need to be cut off out here on the River Road, you know, if the Federals get behind us and so on. So we're going to fall back too. They fall back into Prentice's camp. There's a great, Hubert Dent, the Robertson Battery, again, Alabama Department of Archives and History writes about taking a position that he took the first day. And we know Robertson's Battery is right there by Prentice's headquarters site, that cannon there. They take a position there and they shell the Federals, and there's a pretty substantial line there, and the Federals will pursue and test that last line. We see McAllister's Battery set up here, and we'll shell that. A couple of final things will occur about 2:30 or 3 in the afternoon. Sam Wood will lead his brigade, and you see those two tablets right here. Rutledge's artillery, Tennessee Battery, I believe, and Wood's brigade will make a counterattack through Water Oaks Pond. And you talk about there's no contemporary evidence of Bloody Pond, but there is contemporary evidence. Major Kelly, I believe, of the Arkansas Regiment, and Wood and everybody else talks about they had to wade through this pond, you know, that was waist deep and so on. So they went through the pond, and then you know, they're driven back. The Federals will test somewhat this last line, but they really won't go after it. They won't really move forward and try to move the Confederates. By this time, of course, it's 2:33, 3:30 in the afternoon, and Beauregard decides, all right, we don't have enough troops to stretch across this thing. Terrain is going against Beauregard the whole time. Not only with you know, Shiloh branch, or Tillman branch, Locust Grove branch, Deal branch, all of that. But if this thing is described, help me Perry here just a little bit, if the whole battlefield is described as a triangle, and you've probably seen it described as a triangle, with this being Lick Creek and Tennessee River one shank, Owl Creek the other shank, the gap in the middle being the base of the triangle. As Grant is falling back on the first day, what's happening to the width of the triangle? It's getting smaller, getting compressed, so as a result his line is doing what? It's getting shorter, it's strengthening. So Grant's last line, you know, his original line, Shiloh Church line, runs from here to here. This is Stewart that we were dealing with today, over to McDowell here. That's a long way. His last line runs from here to here. That's a much more short, compact line, and he's getting reinforcements and all that. On the second day, terrain plays against Beauregard in Grant's favor again, because as the Federals move forward, they have more troops, of course, what's happening to the Confederate front that they have to present? It's getting wider. So Grant, as he was falling back on the first day, is getting narrower. Now Beauregard's front is getting wider, and that's why he can't reach to Owl Creek up here, and that's why certainly later on he can't reach past Crescent Field or so, and certainly when he gets down into this area, he can't reach much past Prentice's camps and the Shiloh Church line. So this third line here basically is pretty much all he can do, and he figures out there is no way I can stop him from getting around my flank, so we better just get out of here. And he starts thinking of how I'm gonna spin this, and I'll call it a raid, and then we'll raid up there, you know. So they do start moving out the Eastern Corinth Road, the main Corinth Road, and begin to retreat. They do set up a last line of defense, and if we, and I don't know if I've told y'all my phases and all that, the first phase of fighting on the first day is tied to Shiloh branch and Locust Grove branch. The second phase is on the high ground in between the two. The third phase is Tillman and Deal. On the second day, the exact same opposite thing happens. The first phase is tied to Tillman and Deal. When the Federals move across, the Confederates should have contested that, but they didn't. The second phase is the big phase where everything happens on this high ground, this tableland in the center. And then the third phase is tied to the lower creeks, and the Confederates will actually form a last line of defense back up here where these cannons are, where Cleburne, as we saw last year, deployed Triggs battery and said wake them up with a few shells and so on. He will place Breckinridge's corps on that high ground as a last line of defense. The Federals won't even test it, reminiscent of what? Hardly even testing Grant's last line at Deal on the first day. The Federals hardly won't even go across. Later in the evening, Lew Wallace will cross Shiloh branch, but Breckinridge is gone. Why would Beauregard place Breckinridge there? That's his most, well, it's his right of retreat. Yeah, he's covering the right of retreat, but why Breckinridge? It's his most compact corps, most organized corps with his corps commander and all of that. So Breckinridge, of course, later on will move out. He will hold the ninth position out at the bivouac area, basically on this high ridge where Beauregard had his headquarters, where Bragg's corps was. Then the next day he'll fall back to Mickey's, which is not Locust Grove. What is it today?
Pebble Hill.
Pebble Hill, yeah. Pebble Hill today, and it's in the intervening space, of course, that Sherman sends out Hilderman's brigade and Wood's division, and we get fallen timbers out there. So basically that ends the second day. But to me, you know, the line holds until something forces it, and then it holds again until something forces it, and then Beauregard figures out we pretty much gotta go. Terrain plays a major factor in all of this. All right, any questions?
So
Yes, sir.
what about Grant's claim later that he could have beat the Confederates the second day without fuel?
That is pure the hogwash. Grant does say that, and I think he believes it. And Sherman talks about it too. But given the performance of the Army of the Tennessee in between Buell and Lew Wallace, and how laggard they are and how slow they are, I don't see Grant doing anything on the second day, except perhaps getting himself caught in more casualties and so on. I think probably Grant could have. He says that with Lew Wallace, I replaced my casualties of the day before, and with Lew Wallace's division, I think he probably could have held his last line of defense because of terrain. He held it the night before. There wasn't, total action by the Confederates. But I'm not sure the Confederates could have driven him into the river or the creeks on the second day without Buell. But I certainly don't think that he could have counterattacked the way he did and driven the Confederates off the way he did, which, in my opinion, makes Shiloh the key Union victory that it is. Had Grant not had those reinforcements, or had Grant chosen just to remain on the defensive and not counterattack, what would we think of Shiloh? Shiloh would be another Stones River. Do we think of Stones River as just a major Union victory? We talk of it as more of a draw, kind of.
Just pulled back because he couldn't break.
Yeah, exactly. Perryville, Corinth, of all places. Rosecrans doesn't counterattack on the second day, just kind of lets the Confederates go. Even Antietam. Now, we think of Antietam as a major strategic victory, that Lee has to retreat back into Virginia and the Emancipation Proclamation and all that, but a tactical, what do people always say about Antietam tactically? It was a draw, right? Because had McClellan counterattacked with all those thousands and thousands of troops, had he counterattacked on September the 18th, what would have happened? The war would have probably ended that day. It certainly could have in the east, but we would have talked about Antietam. He could have routed Lee's army and perhaps destroyed Lee's army. We would have talked about Antietam as a major tactical victory that could have brought other additional outcomes. And the fact that Shiloh, I think, is, in my opinion, a major Union strategic victory and tactical victory. The fact that Grant counterattacks makes that possible, and the second day, as a result, is the key factor in that. So people say the second day is not important, and I understand that it never has gotten any attention, but to me, it is very important in determining the level of victory that the Federals will have.
That's a good point, because
Probably not. And he might have tried, initially tested it a little bit, but anytime he met this you know, real fierce resistance, I'm not sure he would have
Get back
pressed
behind
on.
the ravines.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, so that's our control line.
All right, let's head on to Shiloh Church, and we'll see this Confederate line. I think we've got vehicles in Shiloh Church. We have a choice. We can either ride back there